in not as much detail as I might like, so if I gloss over something and you want to know more about it, please ask me a question about it. And one last point before we dive in. I spent the last 5 years here apologizing for showing spectra. I am not going to do that today.
Not apologize.
Exactly. I am not going to apologize. So this is the crater Copernicus on the lunar near side. It's relevant to a lot of the things I've been working on. And we don't actually have a sample from this spot on the lunar surface, but I sure would like to have one. Somewhere from right around there, actually. So just to start off this slide now, I'll do my best to say next slide as we move through slides, but if I lose you, please speak up and we'll get it sorted out.
Don't worry, I want to be bashful.
Okay. So this first slide is a map of the various landing sites that we have made on the lunar surface. It shows some where we didn't return samples from, but the Apollo sample return sites are labeled in green, and then the 3 Luna return sites over here are in red. So this is sort of the set with which I'm going to be working with samples from across these various sites. I haven't worked with any Luna samples, but they are certainly relevant to some of the problems that I'm discussing. This is a chart that's a few years old now, but it's a timeline of lunar exploration since right around 1960. And the future is now maybe a little bit out of date at this point, but that's okay. And you can see this clustering of activity back here in the late 60s and early 70s. And that's what's given us the materials that I'll be working with and talking to you about today. And will actually are still lending us great insights as we continue into the current and future eras of lunar science. All the work that was done here is still exceedingly valuable in allowing our continued scientific exploration of the moon. This is a telescopic image of the lunar near side. And this is the moon that you're all used to seeing, I hope. At least this looks somewhat familiar to most of the people in this room. We're going to change gears a little bit. We're not going to be looking at the moon this way. We're going to be looking at the moon through some slightly different eyes. And I'm giving you some examples here on this next slide, showing various compositional diversity across the surface. And we'll talk about these bottom 2 as well as we move forward. Okay, so before we dive into the actual content of all these projects that I've been working on, I need to give just a very quick overview of the technique that's central to most of what my work has been involved with. On the top, I'm showing you some reflectance spectra. So this is the first set of spectra that I'll be showing you. These are several very common lunar minerals: pyroxenes, olivines, and anorthite or plagioclase feldspar. And you can see that we have these absorption features in the visible to near infrared, and these are caused by transitions in iron atoms in distorted crystallographic sites. And this occurs because when you place these sites in distorted environments, you have these iron atoms have unfilled d orbitals, and they actually are split in energy levels by being situated in the ligand field in the local crystal structure. And if photons are incident at a particular energy, they can actually cause electrons to be excited between different energy levels, and that's what causes these diagnostic absorption features that we're going to be using to infer mineralogy and composition in a variety of different ways. And just zero in, we'll be focusing mostly on minerals that have iron in octahedral sites today, but that's certainly not, you'll find cations in various different coordinations, but for pyroxene and olivine, we'll mostly be focusing on octahedral coordination. And one other background point, I won't be talking about the details here now, but I do need to describe just very generally something called the modified Gaussian model. It's basically a model that's used to deconvolve reflectance spectra into individual component absorptions. I'm showing you an example for an olivine spectrum. This is San Carlos. It's about 090 or so, very classic laboratory standard olivine. And what I've done is just deconvolve this spectrum into its 3 component absorptions around 1 micron. And in so doing, we can actually quantify the strength, position, and width of these diagnostic absorption features and use that to infer various properties about the materials that we're observing. Okay, so moving on to my sort of outline slide, and if you get lost, I have an outline you can follow along the bottom here. These are the things that I'll be talking about, various chapters, if you will. So the first, I'm going to be talking very briefly about a project involved with studying a suite of 4 lunar Mare basalts in great amount of detail where we did mineralogy and petrography as well as reflected spectroscopy of mineral separates. And then flowing out of that, I'll be talking a little bit about ilmenite and what signatures it has in the visible to near infrared and what we can use that for. Then I'll move on and talk about lunar olivines, both in the lab and through remote sensing with the Moon Mineralogy Mapper instrument. Then finish up with a quick overview of lunar meteorites, and lastly, a laboratory experiment on water on lunar soil. So first, this project we're calling the Lunar Rock and Mineral Characterization Consortium. It follows from a similar project involved with lunar soils. Here we're focusing on the immature component of lunar basalts. We worked with 4 Mari basalt samples, 2 low titanium and 2 high titanium samples, and worked with both slabs and paired thin sections. The slabs were used for making mineral separates under very carefully controlled circumstances, and we also made particulate separates of the bulk samples. And the paired thin sections, this came from adjacent faces. The thin sections we used to characterize the petrography of these samples and the modal mineralogy. And we actually did measure the detailed composition of all the mineral separates as well with electron microscope. And these are examples of the results. I'm showing you photomicrographs with both transmitted and plane polarized light here. And unfortunately, I couldn't fit this on nice and conveniently, but what I'm showing you here is that we have very carefully analyzed modal mineralogy for these samples, as well as chemical composition of the mineral separates and the same phases in the bulk samples.
Peter, which side are you on?
Sorry.
Are you on the one with the table that's sideways?
Yeah, I'm on the chart that has sort of the modal mineralogy sideways, and then it's got a bunch of microscope images. Okay. You're good?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So over on the right there, I'm showing you the composition both of the phases in the bulk samples and the mineral separates. And to my knowledge, this represents some of the best tests we have for models for spectral unmixing. Typically when you do spectral unmixing, you'll take your bulk sample, you'll take your rock, and you'll say, well, there may be some olivine in there. So you go grab some olivine from somewhere. No, there's some pyroxene. So you grab some pyroxene from somewhere else. And you build up this suite of N members. And that's all well and good, but there's a lot of assumptions in there that the olivine that you took from somewhere else is representative of the olivine in your sample. And that's not always such a good assumption. The great thing about these samples is all of that gets eliminated. All those free variables that you can say, oh, the fit's bad because of this parameter or that parameter. You can't fall back on that anymore. So if our mixture models aren't working very well, then we have to go back and think about the models rather than the assumptions that we made for our N members. And obviously this is, these samples are relevant to thinking about the issues that go on with natural samples versus synthetic samples. Synthetic samples are great for getting the theory of where various absorption features occur, but small variations, different cation substitutions and things like that can actually matter. So looking at real samples and quantifying the trends in the absorption features is something that really comes out of this study here. I'm just showing you some of the reflectance spectra that come out of this study on the right. So Clive, I'm going to move on to the next slide about ilmenite now. So one of the things that came out of this project was that 2 of these samples were high titanium basalts and had very abundant ilmenite in them. I didn't zoom in on the actual abundances on the previous charts, but they're up to, in some cases, 20% ilmenite, as I recall. Ilmenite and titanium in lunar samples, stepping back a little bit. Titanium content is pretty much the dominant way that we classify Mars basalts on the moon. I'm showing you on the upper right the classification of Mars basalts into various suites based on their titanium content. There are other sort of secondary ways to do it, aluminum, potassium, things like that, but titanium is the dominant way that we classify basalts. And if we can map and sort of correlate composition of Mars basalts versus ages of Mars basalts from crater counts, which I'm showing you on the lower right here, we can maybe get some insight into the evolution of the source region of these Mari volcanic units over time in over lunar geologic history. Just to compare